that my name is Stanton Paddock. Today is August 3rd, 2007. We're at the 2007 Denver 10th Mountain Reunion, and I will be interviewing
Howard Harvey.
All right, please spell it out for me.
Howard Harvey.
Okay, let me just put this so that we can, where is it? Focus, why don't you focus? Okay. And please tell me your hometown.
I live in San Diego, California.
And where were you born?
I was born in Windsor, Ontario, Canada.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
All right. And what rank did you have while you were in the Army?
Sergeant or T4, technician, 4th grade.
Okay.
Radio operator.
Radio operator. And your dates of service?
I went in February 17th. I was drafted, and I was discharged in 1943, and I was discharged November 4th, 1945.
All right. And any medals, commendations?
I was awarded a Bronze Star. Don't think I deserved it.
And so you went through the war without a scratch?
Not a scratch.
All right. Lucky man, right? All right. Well, let's see. So many of the men who were in the 10th Mountain Division volunteered and weren't actually drafted. So your story is a little different. So let's start there. How did you go from being a normal draftee to being into, the elite 10th Mountain Division?
Well, I was drafted. I tried to enlist before I was drafted, but because I was an alien, although a friendly alien, I could not volunteer. So I waited to be drafted. And frankly, I didn't want to be in the infantry because I understood you could get hurt on occasion. I went through basic training at Camp Roberts, California, and trained infantry training and a radio operator. Most of the time in training was learning CW or the Morse code. And when our when our basic training was complete, we were sent to Pittsburgh, California, where there's what do they call it? POE, or where they send you overseas. We were expected to be sent to the South Pacific. Well, at that time when we went up to Camp Stoneman was the name of the camp. We were up there, there was a rumor going around that some of the fellows were going to be sent to take amphibious training with the ski troops. Well, of course, that ski troops don't need amphibious training. Well, about 2 days later, a lot of our names were called out to go down to Fort Ord to join the ski troops in amphibious training. So that's how I got in the 87th Mountain Infantry. And we took the amphibious training, and early in August 1943, we got on troop ships and went up to the Aleutian Islands.
So you were one of the Kiska participants?
Correct, right, yeah.
Not too many.
Yeah. We landed on the island of...
and you were still a radio operator at this point?
I was still a radio operator,
so
yeah.
You landed.
Well, when I first got into the 87th, they put me into M Company. For a short time, I was in M Company. But then we were out on one of the maneuvers or problems, and they let me fire a machine gun, and I don't think I hit the side of the hill. So then I was transferred to the headquarters company to become a radio operator again. And I remember the communication officer there, Captain Joe Hurst, kind of liked the idea that I was transferred to the headquarters company as a radio operator, because I could transmit and receive Morse code faster than anybody else in the company. So he was kind of glad to get me, I guess. He always treated me very well. And then after we got up to Kiska, we landed on, I forget the name of the island now. It's a large island that the Navy had up there. And we transferred from the USS Doyen that we had traveled from San Francisco up to the Aleutian Islands. They transferred us to the St. Mihiel. And from, God, what was the name of that island? From that first island that we landed on for a few days, then we proceeded to Kiska. We landed on Kiska. Landed on Kiska the 15th of August, 1943. I wanted to be fully prepared for the landing and for the combat that we were expecting. We'd been told there were 10,000 Japanese troops on the island. And so the night before we landed, there were church services for all the troops. There was Protestant, Catholic, and Jewish. Well, I went to every one. I wanted to be well fortified. And so we landed on the island. Of course, some of the rifle companies had already landed before my company did. And we went to an area where we dug in, and the weather wasn't too bad when we first landed. I was surprised. It was clear, and I don't recall any fog or that it was. I didn't notice any threatening weather. And so after we dug in, and I could dig down about through the tundra and through the earth, and about 3.5, 4, maybe 4 feet, I ran into rock. It was volcanic rock, I guess. So I had a short foxhole. And I thought, gee whiz, if we take any incoming artillery fire, I'm going to really have to scrooch down in this hole. So anyway, well, as the day went on, the weather started to turn. And by that evening, it was pretty bad weather. Wind was up, very overcast, real foggy, and very windy. You really couldn't hear much going on. And but in our area, there was no activity. It was just miserable weather. And we heard the next day that there had been problems over in 3rd Battalion area where I think I and K Company and Headquarters Company, they had a little firefight. There was a little mix-up in things that happened, and I believe that there were 11 or 12 men killed. I'm not positive about that. We did lose one radio operator. I forget his name now, but he was a Norwegian fellow, very, very well liked. It really stunned the fellows in my radio section in our company. And then the next day, we lost another man over in the 1st Battalion Headquarters Company, where they were set up. They wanted to set up a radio, a 284 radio. Oh, incidentally, the first day we set up our communications. and were in contact. But the 1st Battalion, there was a Japanese, I think it was a 75 millimeter gun, set up in a place where they wanted to set up the radio. So they got 2 men to start moving this gun, and they started to roll it out. Well, the gun had been booby-trapped, and as soon as the weight was released, there was a terrific explosion. And I was talking to Walter Galson, a good friend then. He said he heard the explosion, he turned around, and there were 2 bodies flying through the air. One was Bob Shunk, was one of our good friends from basic training at Camp Roberts. Nicest young man you'd ever want to meet, good looking. I think he was from Chicago. And he was our first friend that I knew that we lost. And after that, we kept contact with battalions, 1st, 2nd, and 3rd Battalion. I was regimental headquarters. And we did normal, what we did during the day, a lot of griping and miserable weather. And eventually we had our sleeping bags, and of course they got very wet. And I don't remember how we finally dried them out. But we finally got, we used shelter halves to cover ourselves during the rain. And then we made tents, pitched our pup tents out of the shelter halves. And then we were able to get these 8-man pyramidal tents. And during the different storms, and the wind was pretty bad, there were 2 different times that our tents were ripped apart and the chains were broken up at the very top. Eventually when we moved over to a different part of the island, the engineers with the caterpillars, they scooped out an area and we set the tents in there. And so the tents were buried up to where the sides were covered, and the wind just blew over the tops, and so we didn't have any more problems with losing the tents. Food was interesting. First we had K rations, and we had C rations. C rations were meat and beans, meat and vegetable stew, meat and vegetable hash. And the next day we had meat and vegetable stew, meat and vegetable hash, meat and beans. Well, they alternated different days. And finally we started getting they upgraded our food to the powdered and dehydrated things like powdered eggs, and I think there were dehydrated rutabagas was one thing. And and then we got some mutton from Australia, and that was the foulest, strongest tasting, strong smelling. I don't think many people ate that, but that was about the best food we had for the rest of the time that we were on Kiska. They moved us to a different part of the island later on, and we were set up next to a lake. And our recon platoon, we had some great guys in that platoon. They were just real great soldiers. And there were a number of Scandinavians, Norwegians and so forth, Finns. And they built a sauna. And they invited, we hadn't had any baths for weeks and weeks, I guess. So they knew that we smelled bad, so they invited us over to use the sauna, and that was great. There was, I think, a barrel in there. I forget exactly how it was set up, with rocks around it. Had a fire built there. And then they poured water on the rocks, and everybody perspired. Of course, we were naked then. We had all of our clothes off. Everybody perspired. I've never in my life felt so clean in my life. Well, after that was over, the hard part came. They told us, now there's the lake. You've got to jump in the lake. Well, that lake water was cold. It wasn't quite frozen yet. It was going to be frozen pretty soon. But some of us kind of rebelled against that. So they went and filled some water, some buckets full of water, and they threw water all over us. And that was a shock. But still, I was clean. I've never been so clean in my life. And, I remember I got a letter from the Canadian government stating that I was still a Canadian citizen, and that I could select any branch of the Canadian Armed Forces and transfer it up to Canada. Well, I thought about all this mud, the rotten weather, and the food wasn't real great. I mean, you can get by with sea rations and things. And I told Captain McKay, my company commander then, about this letter, and he said, well, Harvey, we'd like to keep you here. You're a good soldier, excellent radio operator. And he said, you won't meet a finer bunch of men than you find in the 87th Mountain Infantry. And he didn't want me to leave. So I went away, and I thought about the mud, and the rain, weather, and everything like that. So I sent in for a transfer to the Royal Canadian Air Force. Sent it in. So, there are a number of other things that happened there, but one time a group of fellows went out to, I don't know what they went out for. They went out on a detail, and they came back with a whole bunch of fish. And I don't know if they were trout or salmon or just what right now. Well, how in the world did you catch all these fish? You didn't have any fishing lines. They said, well, we used, what did they call them? DuPont fish hooks. DuPont made the hand grenades that I understand that we use. So they just threw the hand grenades in the lake. That's how we got our fish. But that was a wonderful, wonderful meal that evening. And I'm sure there are other things that happened that don't come to mind right now.
Well, I'd like to ask you, from what you've told me, it sounds like you sort of went through quite the range of different emotions. You know, you're sitting on the boat fearing 10,000 Japanese soldiers,
right,
going to all three religions services, to goofing around on the island, you know, with some Norwegians and some fish.
Right.
So I'd like to know if you could speak to sort of, you know, your emotions on the boat, and when you hit the beach, and you know, you must have the same fear that people had when they hit Normandy, only nobody was shooting at you. So what did you feel, you know, when you realized there weren't any Japanese there? And so just sort of take me through your feelings during this time.
Yeah. I don't really remember too many emotions. There was, what's the word? You're anticipating something. I don't know that I dreaded it, but I don't think I was looking forward to it either. I don't know. I don't remember being frightened. I should have been. Maybe if I was in a rifle company, I would have. And my emotions about the Rifleman really changed, not changed, but, well, I'll talk about that later, about the rifleman. But if I had been a rifleman, I probably would have been a little bit more emotionally. But I do remember in the landing craft, when we were headed toward the island, I could see the island. I mentioned before the weather was clear, and I could see the troops going up on this ridge, and they were very clear. I mean, you could see them. Didn't look like they were trying to be covered, but, they were such obvious targets. I thought, my God, those guys are going to get shot at. I mean, that was my emotion right at that time, to see them and these figures going up the mountain right on the edge, and they were just in clear sight. And if anybody on the opposite side, any Japanese with a machine gun, by golly, we would have had some terrible casualties right there. But of course, there were no Japanese there. But I don't recall any particular fright at that time.
What about when you found out that there weren't any Japanese on this island? What was sort of the mood amongst you and your friends?
Well, we hadn't heard any firing. It was a feeling of relief, of course, and I guess that we would just go on with our normal, everyday, whatever they had planned for us. I do remember being in that same area. This is another little story. Jack Nielsen and I had guard duty in two adjoining areas, and it was miserable. The wind was blowing terrible, raining. We did a lot of griping and growling about the weather, and so we went behind a little mound to kind of protect us from the wind. We didn't feel that the corporal of the guard or sergeant of the guard would be out checking us. And by golly, we saw a pyramidal tent set up. So we went down and stood behind the tent, and we were talking. And somebody opened the flap of the tent, and they looked out and said, "You guys want some coffee?" Well, wow, that sounded good. So we went in, we had some coffee. Well, this must have been about the third day that we were there on the island. They must have made that coffee the first day. That's the worst coffee I've ever tasted in my life. And every time I have a rotten cup of coffee, I think of that coffee. They were nice to offer it to us, but my God, it was awful. I hope they improved their recipe for coffee after that. But as far as emotions, I know I must have been frightened, but I don't recall now. But it wasn't the type of fright that came in Italy. Yeah.
So I guess I'm a little confused here. I thought you transferred to the Royal Canadian Air Force.
That's later.
That was after Italy?
That was later. That was after Kiska, after we came back, after I became a mountain soldier, after I'd received training, learned to ski, and we were down in Texas. About a year later, the transfer came through. Well, by that time, I was a real proud mountain soldier.
So you didn't end up making...
I didn't end up going to...
I see.
I didn't do that, no.
Okay.
And what Captain John McKay told me was very true. There are no greater men than that were in my outfit to serve with. So.
Okay. Okay, so after you came back from Kiska,
Right.
shipped to Camp Hale?
Yes, we came back on the SS Denali, which was transferred to a troop ship, had been Alaskan steamship liner. Came down the inside passage, got off at Prince Rupert, got on the train, came down to Camp Carson, Colorado, at Colorado Springs, to acclimate us a little bit. We'd been at sea level so long. So they put us up there about 5,600 feet, whatever it is. And then after that, then they sent us up to Camp Hale. And at that time, they were taking men out of the 87th, transferring them to the 90th, taking men out of the 90th, putting some of them into the 87th that had mountain training. They kept a number of us that came in from Camp Roberts, kept us in the 87th. I don't know why, because we hadn't had the mountain training. They did give us mountain training, and I learned to ski there, and I really loved skiing and continued skiing till I was 82. There was a period of time that I didn't ski after the war, but that was real important to ski. But we came to Camp Hale and took mountain training and enjoyed some of it, and I guess I did pretty well. Oh, D-Series. D-Series was to be 6 weeks out in the mountains, and everybody was looking forward to it, or not looking forward to it, one of the two. And the day before, or 2 days before we left, we went to go out on D-Series, they came and told me, well, you're not going to go. You're going to go down to Fort Benning, Georgia for more communication school. So the day that the guys went out on D-Series, I got on the train at Pando and went down to Columbus, Georgia, to Fort Benning. And the day I left, it was 16 below zero at Camp Hale.
So were you happy that you got to miss that upcoming torture of D-Series?
I was very happy, but ever since then I wish I had been able to do it, because all my other buddies did it. I know I would have been able to do it, but I missed out on it. And now I can't say that I went through D-Series with the rest of them.
But, so you got more training, came back with...
I got more communication training, yes.
And then shipped back to
Right,
Hale?
right. And then after I came back, they made a T4 out of me, or a sergeant.
All right. So let's go overseas now.
Okay.
Tell me about, your first impressions of Italy, you get off the boat.
Okay, when we arrived in Naples, the harbor was full of, excuse me, sunken ships. The Germans had scuttled a lot of ships. Maybe our Air Corps was responsible for some of that too. It was just a pathetic looking sight. The buildings, there's a lot of, as I remember, there are a lot of destruction. But I remember one Italian in a little boat, a little rowboat. He was rowing around looking for something that might be floating, like an orange or any food that he could pick up. And he would put it in the boat and take it home to his family. And little kids, gosh, they were dirty, couldn't help it, and everybody was hungry. And then we transferred to the Italian ship called the Sestriere, and not much of a troop ship. They had built kind of walkways out on over the side of the ship, and that's where the troops went if they had to go to the bathroom. They went over the side of the ship. And I don't remember how long I don't remember how long it took to get up there. If we were on there overnight, I guess we were overnight. But we left Naples and went on up to, what's the name of that? Livorno. Livorno. Got off at Livorno. And while we were waiting for trucks to take us to the area they call the King's Hunting Ground, we were waiting and waiting and waiting. And there were Italians there. They kept on saying mangiare, mangiare. But they were hungry. They were asking for food. And of course, we didn't have any. But they also had some wine. So I thought, well, by golly, I'll get some wine. I'll put that in my canteen. I guess some of the other fellows did that. Tasted it, and I poured the wine out. It was terrible. And then they sent us to the area called the King's Hunting Ground outside of Pisa. And we were in tents there. And I haven't been so cold in my life. I was never cold in the snow up in Camp Hale, with our sleeping bags. We had the mummy bag and the otter bag, and never felt cold, in the sleeping bag. But in Italy, we only had 2 blankets, and it was cold. I was colder there than I had been in Camp Hale. They sent us to San Marcello, a place called San Marcello, up toward the line. And we were there for a number of days, and we stayed, I think it was called Villa Secundo, that belonged to an Italian admiral. I guess it was his second house or something like that. And we were there for a few days, and then we got in trucks at night, and they took us up toward the line again, got up to a point, and we got out of the trucks. And they told it was going to be a little hike to get to our next point. Well, it was quite a hike. I know I've been on longer hikes, but this one seemed to go and go and go forever. It was dark for a while. It was dark, and it was icy. And then it seemed to get light. Well, they had been shining lights, these searchlights on the clouds, for artificial moonlight. I don't know if they did that because the 1st Battalion 86 was preparing, to go up Riva Ridge. And they were looking for routes to go up these 5 different peaks. And some places they had to pound in pitons to put in ropes so the fellows could climb up. That's one reason that we heard that they had the artificial moonlight. We finally got to the town of Vidiciatico. And they put us in a building. It's either a 2 or 3 story building. And I tried to find that building after we went back on a reunion. I never could find it. And we were there. We stayed indoors during the day. They said they've got 5,000 troops that they sneaked in during the evening, during the dark hours. And we knew that we were going to jump off pretty soon. And then after we were there for a while, well, for maybe a day or so, till they would get all the troops in the areas. And we moved up to a point, I guess, close to the town of Quarchola. And we set up a radio. And at that time, I was kind of chilly. I thought, well, we were covered up. We had a cover over the radio and everything. And Wesley Estes and I were on the radio. And I thought, well, why don't we make some hot chocolate? So we got some hot chocolate some chocolate out of our K ration, chopped it up, cut it up, and put water in the canteen cup, put it on the fire, and all of a sudden the little stove just, and God, I turned it off, and I thought, my God, I hope no, because it was getting pretty dark then. Well, I didn't want to give away the main attraction that night. I thought, my God, they're really going to be after us. Well, I guess we were covered up and didn't show off anything. And then Sergeant Ramsey came and told me, well, Harvey, we want you to go down here, and posted me as a guard at a certain point. So I went down there, and I don't remember how far it was, maybe a few hundred yards. There was some artillery fire that came in. I thought, oh God, where am I going to go? I'm looking for a place to conceal myself. Well, they weren't after me. I was just nervous, and I guess that's the first time I started to wonder about being frightened because of the artillery. Well, after it got later and the troops started, they jumped off, from our line of departure, went up the hill, and after a while we started hearing the sounds of battle, the firing of the guns and everything like that. Burp guns and so forth, mortar fire. And we heard that during the night. We were on the radio monitoring. I don't recall now any messages that were startling. Then after it started to get light, then they were bringing down some of the casualties, some of the wounded guys, some German prisoners, and some of our fatalities. Some of our fellows had been killed. And right then, I appreciated the work that the Rifleman I've never had so much respect. Those guys were fantastic. I don't need it. It's all right. I'm sorry. What those guys went through is, I've often wondered, would I have had the courage to do that? I think I would have. In fact, later on, I had a little experience where I thought, well, I guess I can handle this combat okay. But that first period of time when I really realized what a rifleman does, what they had to do. I mean, there's only one thing they can do. They can't back off, you know, they have to do their job. And I've just, well, John McKay was right, Captain McKay, and when he said you'll not meet a better bunch of guys. And that, so anyway, after Belvedere, we let's see, one time I was Colonel Fowler. Colonel Fowler was our regimental commander, just a wonderful man, great officer. And I was his radio operator, alternated with another fellow named Don Carroll. And I was with the colonel, and we were going through a town, I think it was Abatea. The town, I remember it started with an A, and we came upon a building, and we stopped there, and they came out of this building that there had been some damage, and they just told them that 2 of our chaplains had been killed and 1 wounded. Chaplain Montgomery were killed. A chaplain, he had an Italian name, he was a Catholic. Chaplain, oh golly, I can't remember his name, and his name is in the one of the rooms up over here. Anyway, Colonel Fowler was quite moved by that. I mean, he was really, really shaken by the death of the 2 chaplains. That may have been the time that we took Casiliano, for some reason I'm forgetting these names now. Pietro Collura. My company went to Pietro Collura, and on the way over there we rented some terrific artillery fire, and we were able to duck into a German what do they call it? Well, we're dug out in where they keep the troops. I can't think of that name. Anyway, it was a real safe place. And anyway, after the fire let up, we continued on. We finally got to, after a couple of other experiences, to Pietro Collura. And we stayed there for several days. We stayed in a farmhouse up on the 2nd floor, my radio section. And the family there, after we arrived there, the family came out of the hills somewhere, and they'd been away. We set up our equipment there in that farmhouse. And there were 2 adult families and 3 or 4 children there. And the children were just great. They just loved being around the soldiers. And one of them in particular, her name was Fernanda. And I think she was probably 6 or 7 years old. But she just was just a delightful little child. And there was another one, Maria, and Domenico. Well, on the reunion in 1985, I was able to see Fernanda and Domenico. Well, Fernanda was a mother by then, and Domenico was not real tall, but he was very husky, and he had a great speaking voice. He should have taken voice lessons, and he should have been a basso profundo. He had a great voice. And then in about 2002, we were back there again and saw Fernanda, and Fernanda's a grandmother now. But anyway, getting back to the...
Before you start again, let me just tell you, we only have about 5 more minutes left before the next guy has to come in.
Okay, all right. One time we had to take Sergeant Major Jones down to division headquarters, wherever they were. So Bill Gardner, the driver, and I was the radio operator, got in the Jeep and took Sergeant Major Jones. As soon as we got out of the company area, Sergeant Jones told Gardner, said, "Stop before you go any farther." And he unzipped his bag there and pulled out a bottle of cognac. And he wanted us to have a drink of cognac. Well, Bill was driving, and he said, "Well, I can't when I'm driving." And I said, "Well, I'm not on the radio, I shouldn't." He said, "Go ahead and take." So I took a little sip, and God, it was awful strong stuff. Gave it back to Sergeant Jones, and he had a good gulp. And once or twice on the way back to wherever we were going, Sergeant Jones said, "Stop before you go any farther." Got down to where we were supposed to go, and he took care of his business, drove back, and another 1 or 2 times, "Stop before you go any farther," and he had another slug. I don't know why he wanted to stop. Anyway, it was time that we got up to the company area, and we'd turn off the road, and Bob, made a left-hand turn. Well, Sergeant Jones was on the right-hand side. He just flopped out of the Jeep. Got back in the Jeep, drove up to the company area, and he brushed himself off, and he walked to his quarters, wherever he was. Oh, gosh. Then, the jump off on the 14th of April. We were waiting to move up to follow the line companies. Waited and waited. Well, there was a call. They called me. They said one of our operators was killed. I forget his name now. 2nd Battalion headquarters. You go on up there, which I did, and was there for a few days. Went out on an observation post one day, and with another fellow, another operator, and we were overlooking up on the top of a hill or a mountain hill, and they were trying to take the town of Tole, T-O-L-E, and we were taking some pretty good fire from a self-propelled gun from the Germans. You could hear those things go off across the other side of the valley there, and you could hear the screaming of this thing. This was frightening. And all of a sudden, other fellow there, we were in the same foxhole. He said, "I got to get out of here. I got to get out of here." And he was a real good friend of the fellow that had been killed that I was taking his place. I said, "No, you got to stay in here. You can't get up." "I got to get up." I finally had to sit on him. And I didn't want to be on top. I wanted to be underneath. But anyway, I felt then, well, if I can handle this, well, I can handle this combat all right. So anyway, we went on, and more great admiration for the Rifleman. And I finally got sent back up to my company, and another fellow, Larry Waugh, took my place there. And got up to Lake Garda, Lago de Garda, and a lot happened up there, but On the 2nd of May, we received a message on the radio. Be sure to listen to 6 or 6:30 for a very important message. And it was then that they told us the Germans had surrendered. The war was over. We were in the second floor of a building. Our wire section was in the room underneath us, directly underneath us. Well, we, in the radio section, heard this news. We jumped up and down. We're so happy. And the cement on the room below us all came off and went down on the wire section. They came storming up, wanting to fight. What was going on? We said, the war is over. The war is over. But all this plaster on the ceiling above them was loosened, and it fell on them when we jumped up and down above them. And there was a lot of excitement then at that time.
I can imagine so.
Yeah. I remember there was a tank destroyer on the road outside of us. They had a .50 caliber machine gun. They were shooting the gun out across the lake and everything like that. A couple of other things happened, but that was...
Well, yeah, I'm afraid we have to stop you now because I can
Sure.
already hear them outside clawing to get in the next guy.
That's fine.
Right.
Okay.
All right, I'll take that off you, actually.
Okay.